A 7-year-old girl in Atlanta saved a stranger's life on a bus stop bench. What he did with that second chance would take 10 years to fully understand, and it started with a number nobody thought to ask for. Maya Devereux was 7 years old, and she had a way of walking that made people glance twice, not because she was loud or showy, but because she moved like someone keeping a promise to herself. Shoulders back, eyes forward, a plastic grocery bag swinging from one hand, careful, like the eggs inside it were the only eggs left in the world. It was late August in Atlanta, the kind of heat that sat on your skin instead of just touching it. The sidewalk outside the Kroger on Cascade Road shimmered where the sun hit it straight on. Maya had walked this route so many times that her feet barely needed her attention anymore. Past the barber shop with the red and blue pole, past the church with the hand-painted sign, past the bus stop where the 71 picked people up every 22 minutes. She knew it was 22 minutes because her grandmother had told her once. Maya remembered numbers the way other kids remembered songs. Her grandmother, Odessa, had raised her since Maya was 2. Maya didn't know all the reasons why. She knew the shape of it, the way children know the shape of things before they know the words. Her mother worked 2 jobs in another city and called on Sundays. Her grandmother's small house on Delow Drive was the only home Maya had ever really had. Odessa had been sick for 3 months. Not the kind of sick you got better from with juice and rest. The kind that made her hands shake when she poured coffee. The kind that made her sit down in the middle of folding laundry, like the basket had suddenly gotten too heavy to argue with. Maya had stopped asking what was wrong, because the answer always came back soft and unfinished, the way adults answered when they were protecting you from something. So today, on the walk back from the store, with eggs and a loaf of bread, and the $4 in change that Odessa had counted out twice before letting her go, Maya wasn't thinking about much, except getting home before the eggs got too warm in the bag. That was when she heard it. Gasp first, sharp and short, rippling through the small cluster of people waiting at the bus stop. And a sound that wasn't quite a crash, and wasn't quite a fall, something in between, heavy and final, like a stack of books sliding off a shelf all at once. Maya turned. The man had collapsed onto the bench at the bus stop, then slid sideways onto the concrete. He was tall, maybe 50, wearing a gray suit that looked like it belonged somewhere much colder than a Georgia sidewalk in August. His briefcase had fallen open beside him, papers fanning out across the pavement. People backed away. A woman covered her mouth. A teenager near the bench lifted his phone, not to call anyone, but to film, the way people sometimes did when something felt more like content than catastrophe. Nobody moved toward him. Maya did. She set the grocery bag down on the curb, gentle, the way you'd set down something you intended to come back for, and she knelt beside the man. His face had gone the color of old paper. A thin line of sweat ran from his hairline down past his ear. His eyes were half open, unfocused, somewhere between awake and somewhere else entirely. "Sir," Maya said, touching his shoulder. "Sir, can you hear me?" He didn't answer. She felt the fear rise in her chest, cold and fast, but it didn't take her hands with it. Her hands stayed steady, the way Odessa's hands used to be steady before they started shaking. She looked around. The teenager was still filming. Nobody else had moved. She reached into the front pocket of her shorts and pulled out the small flip phone Odessa made, her carry, for emergencies, Odessa always said, though neither of them had ever said out loud what kind of emergency they meant. She dialed 911. The line connected on the second ring. "There's a man on Cascade Road," Maya said, her voice clear, steady, the practiced calm of a child who had learned to sound older than she was, because the moment required it. At the bus stop near the Kroger, he fell down. "He's breathing, but he won't wake up." Dispatcher asked her questions. Maya answered every one. She gave the cross street. She described his suit, his briefcase, the color of his lips. She stayed on the line until she heard the siren rising in the distance. Faint, and then not faint at all. When the paramedics arrived, one of them crouched beside her for a moment after they'd lifted the man onto the gurney. "You the one who called this in?" Maya nodded. "You did good, baby girl. Real good." She watched them load him into the ambulance. The crowd had already started to disperse, the teenager pocketing his phone and walking off like he'd watched a movie end. Nobody thanked her. Nobody asked her name. Maya picked the grocery bag back up off the curb. The eggs, somehow, were still whole. She walked the rest of the way home, the bag heavier now in a way that had nothing to do with eggs. The house on Delow Drive had a front porch with a swing that didn't swing anymore. The chain rusted stiff on one side, and a window unit in the front room that rattled like it was always 1 degree away from giving up entirely. Maya let herself in through the screen door, the eggs and bread set carefully on the kitchen counter, and called out the way she always did. "Emma, I'm back!" No answer. She found Odessa in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with one hand pressed flat against her chest, breathing in short, careful pulls like the air in the room had gotten thin. "Grandma." Odessa looked up. Her smile came slow, the way it always did lately, like it cost her something to produce it. "There's my girl." Maya set the bag down and crossed the room, the way she'd crossed toward the man on the sidewalk 20 minutes earlier. Same steady hands. "You didn't take your noon pill," Maya said. It wasn't a question. She'd learned the schedule, the way she'd learned the bus times. By necessity, by paying attention when nobody told her she had to. I was resting my eyes. Maya got the bottle from the kitchen, brought back a glass of water, and handed both over, without being asked. Odessa took the pill, with hands that trembled just slightly. Just enough that Maya noticed and said nothing, because saying something never made the trembling stop. It only made Odessa feel bad about something she couldn't help. "You always taking care of me," Odessa murmured, settling back against the pillow. "When'd you get to be the grown one in this house?" Maya didn't answer that. She just sat on the edge of the bed and let her grandmother's hand rest over hers. For a while, neither of them said anything at all. Odessa had been a singer once, in a church choir 3 decades running, the kind of voice that gets made strangers stop in the parking lot just to listen through the open doors. She'd raised 4 children of her own, and then, when life rearranged itself, the way it sometimes does, she'd raised Maya too, without complaint, without once making the girl feel like an inconvenience. Diagnosis had come in May. Heart failure, the doctor had called it, though he'd used a longer phrase first that Maya hadn't understood, and Odessa hadn't bothered to translate. What Maya understood was simpler. Her grandmother was getting smaller in ways that had nothing to do with weight, and slower in ways that had nothing to do with age alone. And some mornings, she didn't get out of bed until the sun was already high enough that the heat had settled into the house for good. "I got the eggs," Maya said eventually, because it felt like something true and small to offer. "They didn't break. That's my girl." Odessa's eyes were wet, though she didn't let it spill over. "Careful hands." "I helped a man today too," Maya said. "He fell down at the bus stop. I called 911. Odessa's eyes opened wider. "You did what?" He wasn't waking up. Nobody else was doing anything. Maya shrugged, the way children shrug when something feels obvious to them, and they don't test. And what their cannabations is in everyone else. "So I called." Odessa pulled her granddaughter closer, pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Lord," she said softly. 7 years old. "The paramedic said I did good." "You did more than good, baby." Odessa held her for a long moment. "You hear me? More than good." Later, when the heat in the house had thickened into evening, Odessa asked Maya to help her to the chair by the window, the one with the cushion gone flat from years of use. Maya braced her grandmother's weight the way she'd learned to, one arm under the shoulders, patient, unhurried. Odessa settled into the chair and looked out at the street, the kids riding bikes in the last of the daylight, the rusted swing on the porch that hadn't moved in months. "Maya," she said, "if something ever happens to me, don't." Maya's voice came fast, sharper than she meant it. "You're not going anywhere." Odessa looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind her eyes. Then she reached out and smoothed a stray curl back from Maya's forehead. "You're stronger than you know, child," she said. "Stronger than most grown folks I've met." Maya didn't answer. She just leaned her head against her grandmother's shoulder, and watched the streetlights flicker on, one by one, down the length of Delow Drive. The man's name was Desmond Cole, and 3 days after he woke up in a hospital bed at Grady Memorial, he was still trying to understand how a person could build 40 years of careful, deliberate success and still end up on the ground with his life in the hands of a child he'd rethink, but they never met. He was 52 years old, the founder and chief executive of Coleridge Industrial, a logistics and manufacturing conglomerate that operated in 11 states and employed just under 6,000 people. He had built it from a single trucking contract his father had left him, 26 years old at the time, with nothing but a name and a stubbornness that had never once let up. Forbes had profiled him twice. Black Enterprise had put him on a cover. He had shaken hands with 2 presidents and sat on the boards of institutions that most people only ever read about. He had also, on the morning he collapsed, been on his way to sign a deal that would shutter the Coleridge distribution facility in East Point, the one his own father had helped build. the one that employed 412 people in a neighborhood that didn't have many other places left to work. The deal would consolidate operations into an automated facility upstate. It would save the company $11 million a year. It would also end 412 livelihoods in a single afternoon. Desmond had known this. He'd run the numbers a dozen different ways, looking for an outcome that didn't require it, and hadn't found one he was willing to fight the board hard enough to defend. He had told himself it was just business. He had told himself someone else would do it if he didn't. He had told himself this every morning for 3 weeks. And on the morning of the signing, his chest had gone tight, and his vision had swum, and the sidewalk had come up to meet him before he'd telling himself anything at all. A nurse came in on the 3rd morning, with a clipboard and a careful smile. "You gave us all quite a scare, Mr. Cum." What happened?" he said. His voice came out rough, unused. "Cardiac event, stress, dehydration, and from what your labs show, you hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in about a month." She made a note. "You're lucky. If help hadn't come as fast as it did," she didn't finish the sentence. "She didn't need to." "Who called it in?" Desmond asked. The nurse's smile shifted into something almost amused. "A little girl, 7 years old, from what the paramedics said. She was at the scene before anyone else moved. Stayed on the line with dispatch the whole time. Gave them everything they needed." Desmond stared at her. "A child?" "Yes, sir. The EMTs said she didn't panic once. Calm as anything." The nurse shook her head, like she still couldn't quite believe it herself. "Probably saved your life." After she left, Desmond lay back against the pillows and let the image settle into him. A small figure kneeling on hot concrete, steady hands, a voice that hadn't shaken even when his had stopped entirely. He had built an empire surrounded by powerful people, board members, investors, men who wore suits more expensive than his, and men who wore suits cheaper than his, and pretended not to notice the difference. And when he had gone down, actually gone down, face against the pavement, the closest he had ever come to the end of everything, none of them had been there. A stranger's child had been there instead. 2 days later, still recovering, he called his head of security into the hospital room. "Find her," he said. "Sir, there's no name on file, no contact information. Just, I don't care," Desmond said, and his voice came out steadier than it had in days. "Full traffic camera footage. Check the Kroger security feed. Ask the paramedics who responded. Somebody knows something. Find her." It took 4 days. The footage that finally surfaced came from a barber shop 2 doors down from the bus stop. Grainy and wide-angled, but unmistakable. A small girl in a yellow shirt, kneeling on the sidewalk, one hand on his shoulder, steady as a held breath. Desmond stared at the still frame for a long time. He had met senators. He had met titans of industry who could move markets with a single phone call. He had never once looked at any of them the way he looked at this image. A 7-year-old who hadn't run, hadn't frozen, hadn't waited for someone else to be the one who acted. "Find out who she is," he said quietly. "I want to meet her." He didn't know yet what he would say when he did, but he knew, in a way he couldn't fully explain to himself, that this girl had appeared in his life for a reason that went deeper than gratitude. The letter arrived on a Thursday, slid through the mail slot of the house on Delow Drive with a soft sound that almost went unnoticed. Maya was at the kitchen table, coloring a picture of a garden she'd never actually seen anywhere, except in her own head, when she heard it land. She picked it up. Heavy cream paper, sealed with a small embossed crest she didn't recognize. Her grandmother's name written across the front, in handwriting too careful to be a bill. "Grandma," Maya called. "Something came for you." Odessa shuffled in from the bedroom, scarf wrapped loosely around her head, the one she'd started wearing on the days her hair felt like too much to deal with. She took the envelope and turned it over twice before opening it, the way you might examine something you weren't sure you trusted. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, the handwriting firm and unhurried. "Dear Ms. Devereux, I recently learned that your granddaughter was the one who saved my life outside the Cascade Road bus stop 2 weeks ago. I have not been able to stop thinking about her since. Her calm, her clarity, the fact that she acted while grown adults around her did nothing. It has changed something in me that I am still trying to understand. I would be honored if you and Maya would join me for lunch this Saturday, so that I might thank her properly. There is no obligation attached to this invitation beyond my own gratitude. A table will be held under my name at Bones, on Piedmont Road, at noon. With respect and thanks, Desmond Cole." Odessa read it twice. Her expression settled into something between confusion and disbelief. "What is it?" Maya asked, leaning closer. Odessa handed her the letter. Maya scanned it slowly, sounding out the longer words under her breath. That's the man, Maya said. The one from the bus stop. Seems so. Are we gonna go? Odessa hesitated. Baby, that man is rich. Real rich. The kind of rich that doesn't usually come knocking on doors like ours. Maya frowned. He just wants to say thank you. That's what it says. Thank yous don't usually come on paper like this. Odessa folded the letter back along its crease. I don't know what a man like that wants with people like us. He didn't look mean, Maya said. He just looked sick. Like you, sometimes. Something in the way she said it made Odessa go still. That same quiet certainty, the same steadiness that had carried her granddaughter through a stranger's emergency without flinching. All right, Odessa said finally. We'll go, but we keep our guard up. Polite, grateful, careful. Saturday arrived with a sky scrubbed clean of clouds. Odessa wore the navy dress she hadn't taken out of the closet in over a year, and a thin gold chain that had belonged to her own mother. Maya wore her best yellow dress, the one with the small white buttons, and held her grandmother's hand the entire walk from the bus stop to the restaurant door. Bones was nothing like anywhere Maya had ever been. Dark wood and white tablecloths, a hum of quiet conversation, a host who greeted them by name like he'd been expecting them all morning, which he had. Desmond Cole stood as they were led to the table. He looked different than the man on the sidewalk had looked. Steadier, but also, somehow, more tired, in a way that had nothing to do with the heart event. He knelt slightly when he reached Maya, bringing himself down to her eye level. You must be Maya, he said. You saved my life. Maya studied him for a moment, unafraid, but careful. You fell down pretty hard. He almost laughed. I did. I just called the number, she said. That's all I did. That number, Desmond said, was the difference between me being here and me not being here. That's not nothing. He turned to Odessa, extended his hand. Ms. Devereux, thank you for coming. I know it wasn't an easy decision. Odessa shook his hand, careful, measuring him the way she measured most things now, slowly, and with the specific attention of someone who didn't have the energy left to waste on people who weren't worth it. The lunch went differently than either of them had expected. Desmond didn't ask invasive questions. He didn't perform generosity or wave the check around like a trophy. He asked Maya about her drawings, about what she wanted to be when she grew up. An architect, she told him, because she liked thinking about how rooms fit together, and he asked Odessa, gently, about her health, the way someone asks who actually wants the real answer. When the check came, he handled it without ceremony, just a quiet nod, and an offer, open, no pressure, to see them again sometime, if they were comfortable with it. Walking home, Odessa kept glancing sideways at her granddaughter. He's not what I expected, she admitted finally. Maya nodded slowly. He's lonely. How do you figure that? I could just tell. Odessa didn't answer. That night, after Maya had fallen asleep faster and easier than she had in weeks, Odessa sat at the kitchen table, with Desmond's letter in front of her, turning the same thought over and over. Maybe this wasn't the end of something strange. Maybe it was only the beginning of something neither of them had words for yet. It started slowly, the way most hard things do. Odessa's naps grew longer. Her silences stretched further between sentences. The dizzy spells came more often, and one morning Maya found her sitting on the bathroom floor, dazed, her lips gone the color of a bruise. That was the morning Maya understood, fully and finally, that things were not getting better. They were only getting quieter. The way a storm gets quiet, right before it's done deciding what it's going to take with it. Desmond had kept coming around. What started as a single lunch had folded itself, gradually and without announcement, into something like a rhythm. He never pushed his way into their lives. He simply showed up, driving Odessa to her cardiology appointments, when the bus schedule didn't the fade held her but, dropping off groceries without being asked, sitting at the kitchen table some evenings just to talk. No agenda, no audience. He became, without either of them naming it directly, the first adult in Maya's go outside her grandmother, who didn't look away when things got hard. One evening in October, with Odessa resting in the next room, Desmond sat across from Maya at the kitchen table while she worked on a drawing, a house, with a porch swing that actually moved, the way she imagined it instead of the way it really was. Can I ask you something? He said. Maya looked up. Okay. That day, on the sidewalk, were you scared? She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about most things. Yeah, But I didn't have time to be scared and help you at the same time, so I just helped. Desmond was quiet for a long moment. I was on my way to do something that day, he said. Something I knew was wrong. Not against the law, just wrong. I'd been telling myself it was just business for weeks, that somebody else would do it if I didn't. He looked at his hands. And then I woke up in a hospital bed, because a 7-year-old did the thing I couldn't bring myself to do for 400 people who needed me to. Maya tilted her head. What thing? The right one, he said. Even when it costs you something. He didn't explain further that night. But 3 weeks later, Coleridge Industrial publicly announced it was canceling the East Point facility closure, and instead, investing $8 million into modernizing the plant, retraining its workforce for the new equipment, rather than replacing them with it. The story ran in the business section of 2 papers. Desmond didn't give interviews about it. He simply did it, and let the 412 people whose jobs had been saved find out the flaw. Everyone else did. The board fought him on it for 6 weeks. 2 investors pulled out entirely. He lost a friendship that had lasted 20 years. A man who told him plainly that sentiment didn't belong in a balance sheet. Desmond never regretted it. Not once. What he found instead, he told Maya much later, was something he hadn't realized he'd lost somewhere along the way of building everything else. Clarity. Odessa passed in the spring, 8 months after the bus stop, in a hospital room, with Maya's hand in hers, and Desmond, standing quietly by the window, the way he'd come to stand in so many rooms in the months between. In the last week, when she was lucid enough to write, Odessa had asked for paper and a pen. She had written something slowly, her handwriting unsteady, but legible, and sealed it in an envelope she handed to Desmond without explanation. For later, was all she said. He'll know when. He kept the letter in his coat pocket for years, unopened, the edges slowly going soft and yellowed with the simple fact of time passing. After the funeral, there were difficult conversations about guardianship, about what came next for an 8-year-old, with no other close family able to take her in. Desmond didn't make a grand announcement about what he intended to do. He simply made the calls that needed making, hired the right people to handle it the right way. 3 months later, Maya moved into a house in Cascade Heights with a room of her own and a porch swing that actually worked. He never tried to replace Odessa. He never used the word father unless Maya used it first, which she did, slowly, over the better part of a year, the way trust gets built, one ordinary Tuesday at a time, rather than in a single dramatic moment. What he gave her instead was steadiness, appointments he never missed, questions he actually wanted the answers to. A man who had once measured his worth in deals and acquisitions, learning instead to measure his days by whether he'd shown up for a school project, or a bad dream, or a quiet dinner where nothing needed to be said at all. 10 years later, the morning air in Atlanta was warm and bright, threading through the oak trees lining the Georgia Tech campus, where caps and gowns moved in slow, proud waves across the quad. Desmond sat near the front of the crowd, hands folded tightly in his lap, his hair grayer now than it had been on a sidewalk a decade earlier. He had attended hundreds of ceremonies in his life, ribbon cuttings, shareholder meetings, galas with his name on the program. None of them had ever made his chest feel the way this one did. His eyes were fixed on one place, the stage, where Maya would walk in a matter of minutes. She had grown into a young woman who still moved like she had at 7, steady, deliberate, unhurried by the noise around her. She wore her gown with the quiet confidence of someone who had built every inch of the path that I led here, even the parts that had nearly broken her. When her name was called, Maya Devereux Cole, summa cum laude, civil engineering, the applause rose around him, loud and warm, and Desmond barely heard it. All he could see was a small girl in a yellow shirt, kneeling on hot concrete, and the woman that girl had become. After the ceremony, amid the noise of hugs and camera flashes, Maya found him standing near the edge of the crowd, the same careful distance he always kept, as if he still didn't quite trust that any of this was real. She crossed the space between them and wrapped her arms around him. "You did it," he said, his voice thick. "We did it," she answered. They sat that afternoon on a bench near the river, away from the noise, the water moving slow and bright in the afternoon sun. "Sometimes I think about that day," Maya said. "If I'd been a few minutes later, if I'd just kept walking." "You never would have kept walking," Desmond said. "That's not who you are." "I didn't save your life," she said after a moment. "Not really. You're the one who decided to change." "No," he said, with a certainty that didn't waver. "You gave me a reason to." She studied his face, the way she used to as a child, searching for the truth underneath. He wasn't the man the business pages had once described, sharp-edged, untouchable. He was someone quieter now, someone who had traded the architecture of an empire for the architecture of a family, and had never once looked back at the trade with regret. "I still miss her," Maya said. "I do too. She'd be proud of you. She'd be proud of us," Desmond said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the edges gone soft with 10 years of carrying. "She wrote this," he said. "Near the end, told me I'd know when to give it to you." Maya opened it slowly. The handwriting was unsteady, but unmistakable. "If she becomes half the woman I believe she will change the world. And if you help her get there, I will never stop being grateful, wherever I am." Maya pressed the letter to her chest and didn't say anything for a long moment. "I'm going to try," she said finally. "You already have," Desmond said. They sat together as the sun moved lower across the water. Two people from different worlds who had been carried toward each other by a single ordinary act on a hot sidewalk. Not as a billionaire and the child who once knelt beside him, but as family, built slowly, carefully, the way anything worth keeping is built. If a story like this ever reaches you, the way it reached me telling it, I hope you remember the simple part of it. Nobody asked Maya to be brave that day. She just was. What would you do if the moment came and no one else was moving? Some things you carry your whole life. This was one of them.